Well, hey everybody. My name is Jonathan Mooney, and I'm really honored and privileged to be spending some time with you today. I'm here to speak with you about how institutions of higher education, but quite frankly, our culture writ large, can empower and celebrate young folks with neurodiversities. So before I dive into that topic, I do want to do a few pieces of housekeeping of my own before I begin. First of all, I want to give you a sense of how I'd like to spend our time together. I read recently that the average human attention span, the average human attention span is about 15 minutes. And then I read that the average attention span of somebody on a virtual conference is about 15 seconds. So I want to assure you that I'm going to keep my talking at you down to a manageable minimum and make sure that we have ample time to talk together in the form of questions, conversation, and dialogue. So I want to empower you and encourage you to put any questions or thoughts or comments that come to your mind while I'm speaking directly in the Q&A feature of Zoom. Not the chat feature, but the Q&A feature. And I will leave ample time to make sure that we work our way through those questions and comments. Okay, second and more important piece of housekeeping. Hey, I want to give a shout out to the folks at the National Resource Center. Let's be honest, putting a conference on is always a hard thing to do, but putting a virtual conference on in this day and age is a big old pain in the ass. So in whatever way you can, not now or later, thank them, because they've done this professionally and they've done it at the highest caliber and quality. But more importantly, I want to thank the folks at the Resource Center for making space in this conference for the conversation around neurodiversity. Building a more inclusive and equitable world is the social justice issue of the 21st century. But unfortunately, people with atypical brains and bodies, folks with disabilities and neurodiversities are often left out of that critical conversation about what we all can do to build a more just and perfect world. So I want to thank them for the opportunity to elevate this conversation. And I want to thank them for the honor of being here with you today. Okay, so we got all the housekeeping out of the way. Let me get right to it. As I mentioned to y'all, I'm here to talk about how we engage and empower young folks with neurodiversities. And, that's all I've really done in my entire professional career, be an advocate for folks who learn outside the lines. But this is also a very personal conversation for me, because I myself am somebody who learned differently, somebody with neurodiversities. And because of those neurodiversities, or I should say because of the way many institutions treat neurodiversity, I struggled tremendously as a child. I was the proverbial square peg that did not fit the round hole of school built around the myth that there is a normal way to learn. And because of that, I struggled. I was the kid who had such a hard time sitting still that I spent most of the day chilling out with the janitor in the hallway. I was the kid who had such a hard time keeping his mouth shut. I grew up on a first name basis with Shirley, the receptionist, in the principal's office. And I was also the kid who had such a terrible time with reading, and specifically a torturous time reading out loud, that I spent most of my elementary school and high school experience hiding in the bathroom to escape reading out loud with tears streaming down my face. I didn't learn to read until I was 12. Couldn't read until I was 12. Now, growing up, as you can imagine, I had every label there was. I was called the bad kid. I was called the lazy kid. I was called the at-risk kid. And then eventually I became the special ed kid. I was diagnosed with a continuum of language-based learning differences in third grade, dyslexia, dysgraphia, and others. I was diagnosed with a whole bunch of executive functioning and behavioral disorders, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, and others in fourth grade. And I dropped out of school for about a year in sixth grade. That year when I left school, I struggled with a number of mental health challenges. I struggled with anxiety. I struggled with depression, and I had a plan for suicide. So you can imagine by the time I got into middle school and beyond, there were all sorts of low expectations that surrounded me. Low expectations that too often surround learners who don't fit our narrow definition of what is normal. I heard it all. I was told I'd be a high school dropout. I was told I'd be unemployed. I was told at one point that I'd end up incarcerated. But you know what? I beat those odds, transcended those low expectations. Opposed to being a high school dropout, I became a college graduate. I graduated from a place called Brown University, which I'm sure most of you know is an Ivy League university, with an honors degree in, of all things, English literature, right? Opposed to being unemployed, I ended up writing books. First book I wrote as an undergraduate at Brown University, and I recently celebrated the publication of my third book, Normal Sucks. And most importantly, opposed to being an inmate, I became an advocate, somebody who has dedicated his entire life to making the world just a little bit better of a place for folks who learn and live differently. So what I want to share with you today is the ideas and the pedagogical practices that put me on a different path. But more important than me, the ideas and pedagogical practices that I know can put young folks with neurodiversities on a different path. And this is a critical conversation at a critical time. Young folks with neurodiversities are an increasing population in higher education, and they struggle, not because something's wrong with them, but often because of the institutional practices designed around the idea that we should all learn the same. But perhaps in this moment right now, young folks with neurodiversities are struggling even more. And so I want to talk about what does it mean to engage them or re-engage them in our current moment, but perhaps more importantly, what does it mean to take those best practices, not just in the short term, but in the long term, and build institutions of higher education that work not just for some learners, but ultimately work for all learners. So with that in mind, there are three things that I want to share that I know make a difference in the life of a diverse learner. So let me start first and foremost with what, from my perspective, is the most important first step to re-engaging and empowering young people like me. If you talk to a young person who grew up chilling out with that janitor in the hallway, if you talk to a young person who grew up in special education like I did, who had the labels I did, and you ask them to describe themselves, more often than not, their description of who they are, not just as learners, but ultimately as human beings, is inherently negative. I've spent 20 years talking with young folks, all 50 states, 5 countries, multiple times in each state. And every time I ask a young person like me, it doesn't matter whether they're in elementary school or whether they're getting their PhD, and I ask them to describe themselves, they always use negative words. They say things like, I'm stupid, I'm crazy, I'm bad, I'm lazy. They have developed a negative self-concept. They have been, in some ways, wounded existentially and deeply because we have a culture that says that normal is good and right and different is deficient. And young folks like me grow up with that self-concept of being deficient as a human being. And nobody thrives in life, much less higher education, when their core lens that they use to make sense of themselves is a deficit pathological lens. So our first step is to rebuild that sense of self, and rebuild that sense of self by understanding and challenging the origin of that negative self-concept. That idea that I'm stupid, crazy, lazy, bad, that I'm abnormal comes from somewhere. And it comes from a long history of putting the problem in the person with the difference. But the reality is the problem is not in the person with the difference. The problem isn't the difference itself. The problem is the way the person with a neurodiversity is treated within educational environments built for the myth that we should all be the same. Now I said a lot to you there, right? So let me use my personal life experience to illuminate that paradigm shift of where or what we put the problem, right? Let's take this thing in my life that folks called ADD, right? Hang out with those words for a second. Attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder. Those words very clearly put the problem inside of me. I have a problem in my brain. But the reality is this thing that everybody called a problem was a difference in the truest sense of the word. Now, it's a difference with very real neurobiologically based limitations, or disabilities. I'm not naive about that, I struggle with paying attention to this day. I have the attention span of a gnat. I struggle with executive functioning and organization. I have explored the feasibility of stapling my car keys to my forehead, right? I got that. Those are very real limitations and very real challenges. But what goes hand in hand with those very real limitations and challenges is a whole bunch of good things that we don't talk enough about. Do y'all know that there's a research study that shows that folks with atypical attention spans are often better problem solvers than the general population? The same study shows that EMTs, emergency medical professionals, firemen and women with ADD are better at their job than so-called normal EMTs. That makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, your house is on fire. You want that dude to have ADD, right? Forget paying attention. Come get my cat, So it's a difference with good things about it, with challenges and limitations, all wrapped up in one. It is not, however, my problem. My problem growing up was the school desk. How in God's name could a school desk be a kid's problem? Well, let me immerse you into my relationship with the school desk, and it is a fraught relationship, right? For some young people, the school desk is not a big deal. It's a benign piece of school furniture. But for me, the school desk might as well be a form of enhanced interrogation that would make Dick Cheney proud, right? This is my experience at the school desk, right? This is first grade. This is 12th grade. This is Brown University. I see that desk, I see that chair, and my hands start to sweat. My face gets all red because I know after 5 seconds at that desk, my foot's going to start bouncing, right? 10 seconds at the desk, both feet start bouncing. 15 seconds at the desk, oh, I'm going to bust out the drums. 15 minutes at the desk, it is all over. I'm the kid trying to take his leg and put it behind his neck, right? And that young person is consistently shamed for that because we have a set of institutional norms and cultural practices that confuses or conflates being the good kid with being the compliant kid. And if you're not the good compliant kid who sits still, raises their hand, and keeps their mouth shut, something is wrong with you. I got that message at home every night at the dinner table with my dad. Jonathan, stop it. What is wrong with you? And I got that message in some of my classrooms. Not all of my classrooms, don't get me wrong, but some of them. I'll never forget, I had a teacher in second grade named Mrs. C. I've had many, many gifted, brilliant teachers in my life who I will celebrate with you today. Mrs. C is not one of those, okay? My foot would be bouncing. She would stop class. She would point at me. All the kids would look at me, and she would say at the top of her lungs, Jonathan, what is your problem? We put the problem in the person, but the problem's not in the person. The problem is in the environment around the person. The problem is the confusion or conflation of being the good kid with being the compliant kid. The problem is the passive learning environment that we have made the norm, where on average, young folks spend 75% of the day sitting still, passively receiving information. And ultimately, the problem is the shame and the social stigma that comes from being publicly called a problem. That's the problem. And the same is true with my so-called learning disabilities, right? I'm sure you all know that the vast majority of young folks receiving special education services in America are receiving those services for specific or language-based learning disabilities. And that language, again, puts the problem in the person, right? You know, something's wrong with Jonathan's brain. But the reality is, just like ADD, these things folks have called objective disorders are differences in the truest sense of the word. Again, I'm not naive about the challenges that come with having my neurodiversity, which is biologically based. You know, I struggle with handwriting, you know, I struggle with spelling. I spell to this day at a third grade level. And, you know, I struggle with reading. I have the phonetic awareness of somebody in middle school at best. And I also struggle with confusing words, you know, who and how look the same to me. Horse and house look the same to me. I swear to you, when I went to Brown University, I thought the university offered a course in orgasmic chemistry, okay? Now imagine my disappointment on the first day of that class, right? I got that. Those are very real limitations, but what goes hand in hand with those very real limitations are a whole bunch of good things that we don't talk enough about, right? Do y'all know that almost half, hang out with this for a second, almost half of small businesses in America, the engine of the American economy, almost half of small businesses in America were founded by or are currently run by somebody with a language-based learning difference. So it's not my problem, you know, it's a difference. My problem was the way the difference was treated. You know, a lot of folks like to come to my story and say, hey, man, you overcame dyslexia, which implies that dyslexia is a bad thing that one must overcome. I did not overcome dyslexia. If I overcame anything, it was dysteachia, right? What I overcame was being made to feel stupid because I learned differently. That's what I overcame. And I'll tell you, we got a national tragedy on our hands, y'all, of young folks leaving school, broadly defined, K-12, post-secondary, leaving school feeling dumb. And that national tragedy has a origin. And its origin is a narrow definition of what constitutes intelligence that we have institutionalized and have celebrated and championed in our broader culture. You know, we, and I mean the big old universal we as a culture, and then we as systems of education, privilege some brains at the expense of other brains. A narrow definition of what constitutes smart, right? Being smart is about being good at school. But I'm sure y'all know that ain't true, you know, that there's all sorts of manifestations of human intelligence and excellence that is not captured in an academic definition of intelligence. Don't know about y'all, but some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, guess what? They didn't read well, they didn't write well, they didn't spell well, they didn't go to Brown University, but guess what? They could rebuild the car engine from scratch. And that intelligence deserves to be named intelligence. And that set of human excellence deserves a pathway in our culture. It deserves to be called smart. But unfortunately, starting super early, we value certain sets of skills as intelligence. You know, if you're like me and you don't read well right off the bat, guess where you find yourself? You find yourself in the stupid group. Y'all remember the stupid group? Anybody? Let me say it differently. I'm sure y'all remember reading groups, right? Let me ask you a question about those reading groups. Was it ever hard to tell which reading group was the smart group and which reading group was the dumb group? Not hard to tell, right? You had the blackbirds over here, you got the bluebirds over here, and then over in the annexed trailer building, you got the sparrows. Come on now, we ain't fooling anybody, right? Let me put it this way. When I was growing up, everybody knew that my group was the dumb group because my group was a bird that did not fly, okay? It was an ostrich and it ran quickly, And I spent all day long chilling out with C Spot Run, and everybody knew that the condors were the smart group because the condors were reading War and Peace, right? Hey, we all get it. We are all immersed in a set of cultural norms and institutional practices that narrowly defines intelligence. We know what gets you in the smart group, and it ain't your tactile kinesthetic intelligence. It ain't your social emotional IQ. It ain't your ability to talk or draw or build or connect or care. It's a narrow band of academic skills that leaves so many people out and wounds them deeply. And that's the problem, not learning differently. So recognizing that the problem's not in people matters. It matters for our institutions and our practices, which I'll talk about in a moment. But more importantly, it matters for the people who were told that they were a problem. So as you embark on being inclusive of neurodiversity, it is essential that we help young folks in our processes develop a more positive sense of self, reframe the problem with them and for them. I'm here today because not of a skill intervention, but because of a self-concept intervention. I told you all I had a plan for suicide when I was 12. What saved me was a videotape my mom showed me. My mom showed me an interview with a young man who went to law school, 20 years old, 22 years old. But the thing about this young man in law school was that he couldn't read a word, and his mom, read every one of his law books to him. Do you have any idea the hope that gave me? Now, let's be honest, sucks to be the guy's mom, right? I got that, but mom wasn't my concern. Law school wasn't my concern. I saw an image of a better future. I saw embodied in somebody else that my differences didn't make me deficient. When I got to Brown University against all odds, I created something called Eye to Eye, which is a mentoring program that takes college students and matches them with younger children. The college students have neurodiversities, and so do the kids. It's not a tutoring program. It's a self-concept rebuilding program. That program is all around the country right now. So that's my ask for you. As we engage the neurodiverse, let's reframe the problem. And let's find ways to saturate them with the message and the image that their differences don't make them deficient, that they're not the problem. The problem ultimately is institutionalized ableism that privileges some brains over others. That's the problem. And that brings me to the second thing that I know makes a difference in the life of young people like me. And it flows naturally and logically from a reframe of the problem, because when we put the problem in the person, it leads us down a certain path. It leads us down the path of trying to remediate the person's problem, make the square peg fit the round hole. But if we recognize the problem's not in the person, not only does it lead us down the path of rebuilding their sense of self, but it changes our area of intervention to not fix the person, but change the context around the person. And nobody in my life embodied that better than my mom. Let me give you a mental image of my mom, Colleen Mooney. Wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her, right? My mom, she's quite a character, right? My mom's not a tall woman. On a good day, in high heels, on her tippy toes, my mom is 4'11", right? Little Irish bulldog, And my mom, she's got this very funny, high-pitched voice. squeaky voice. She totally sounds like Minnie Mouse. And my mother also curses like a truck driver. So let me ask you a question. If you were a principal, if you were a teacher, did you want cursing Minnie Mouse in your face? The answer to that question, if you are at all confused, is no. But guess where my mom was every single day when things were going wrong for her son? Oh, she was in that office. How did we know she was in that office? We knew she was in that office because every dog in the neighborhood was running away. Only bats could hear her high-pitched obscenities. Glass was shattering, My mom understood something, intuitively. She understood that I didn't need somebody in my life to fix me. What I needed was somebody in my life to fight for and with me. That fix-it model for people with atypical brains and bodies, hey, it runs deep now, doesn't it? The Department of Rehabilitation, right? The whole notion of rehabilitating somebody who has fallen off the middle of the bell curve and getting them back into the myth of normal. The whole notion of special education, in which we are constantly focusing on what's wrong with the kid and trying to fix that. We have built an entire edifice that's all about making the square peg fit the round hole. But here's the thing, folks. If we make the peg fit the hole too much, with too much force, eventually it breaks. Nobody lives an empowered life. Nobody thrives feeling broken all the time. So we got to change our action. And our action needs to be directed towards creating access and inclusion by changing the environment around the neurodiverse. That's what my mom did, My mom would say to anyone who would listen, she would say, if my son doesn't learn the way he's taught, well, guess what? Teach the way he learns. Now I'll admit that was a little bit of a paraphrase, because when my mom said it, there were a whole bunch of F-bombs in there that I left out, right? But nonetheless, my mom was an advocate to change the environment. And that's what we need. More than ever, we need you, everybody, to be cursing Minnie and Mickey Mouses for young people's right to learn differently. So as you embark on that advocacy path, what does that look like for you and your system? Well, first of all, we got to make sure that young folks are getting the services that they need. Hey, if you read in the 12th percentile, it ain't fair that you don't get some extra support, and those services by the Department of Inclusion or Disability Support Services, those go by different names. Those are essential to people with neurodiversities. So let's create access and linkages to those. But you know what? We got to also be advocates for accommodation, especially in this day and age of distance learning. I'm here because of accommodations, which is a legal principle that comes from the Americans with Disability Act, but it's also an ethical principle. It's the idea that we have a moral and ethical obligation to build literal and then metaphoric ramps to create access to education for folks who have been left behind. Those things matter. I thrived at Brown University because I had a text to speech. Even before Brown, when I was a kid, it was books on tape. Thing was so big, you had to put it into a backpack and then you plugged it into a generator, right? That matters. That accommodation creates access. I'm here because of the accommodation of speech to text. If you're a kid like me and you misspell everything and nobody can read your handwriting, you know what you've done your entire education? You've dumbed it down. When I was a kid and I was given a writing assignment in class, you know what I would do? I would only write sentences with the words that I could find somewhere in the room. And if I couldn't find a way to write a sentence or paragraph with the words on the DARE poster in the back of the room, you know what I did? I would scribble it so no one could tell. Then they thought I was dumb. Then I thought I was dumb. Rinse and repeat every day. Break that cycle by letting folks talk out their ideas. Nowadays, we got speech to text technology in our pockets on our phones, allowing people to show what they know. But ultimately, we got to go beyond accommodations, because accommodation has a little bit of a negative connotation to it now, doesn't it? Accommodation is kind of like that word tolerance. We tolerate something that we're not all that excited about. Let me put it this way. When my mother-in-law used to come and visit, I didn't celebrate her visit. I accommodated her visit, right? So we got to go beyond accommodation, and we have to see the issue of neurodiversity as an opportunity to embed universal design of instruction within our institutional practices. This idea that there's a normal learner is a myth. The reality is the only normal people are people you don't know very well. The reality is learning diversity, difference is essential. And the more that we can be designing all of our environments, but certainly our institutions of higher education around the ethical and design principle of universal design, the more young folks will thrive. In my life, I had educators and advocates who believed that we should have an active learning environment, not just for some kids, but all kids. And they were dedicated to the idea of changing the environment to facilitate not sitting and getting all day long, but moving and doing. I'm here because I had educators in higher education who believed that we should be doing strength-based education, surfacing a young person's inherent interests and talents, and then building pathways of learning that integrated academic content with those areas of interest and talent. We know more than ever in the virtual learning environment, young folks who feel like the educator knows their strengths, but more importantly, has taken them seriously and has helped them surface a passion, which becomes purpose, which becomes pathway. Those young people with neurodiversities thrive. And ultimately, we need to be holding ourselves accountable to the idea that we should have institutions of higher education that don't just work for some learners, but ultimately work for all learners. Okay, I want to conclude. And I want to share the last principle with you about engaging the neurodiverse before we open it up for questions, conversation, and dialogue. I'll tell you, there's a trend, I think, that concerns me deeply, that we can solve our educational challenges by teacher-proofing the classroom, and that's a trend in K-12, of course, that goes back to No Child Left Behind, in which literally teachers were given scripts to read, treated essentially as a dissemination device for content. But that's also a trend, at times in higher education. And I know that we have been accelerated in virtual learning, but that was a trend that was happening beforehand. The idea that we could create MOOCs and we could create these large data experiences that essentially dehumanize the learning experience. But I'm here to tell you from a personal perspective that education is first and foremost a deeply human endeavor. And for the neurodiverse, even more so. I'll tell you a research study I came across recently that followed a bunch of at-risk young folks, many of whom, if not all of whom, had significant neurodiversities. And it was a study that followed a bunch of young folks from the south side of Chicago. And it followed these young folks for a long time. It was one of the largest longitudinal studies of its kind. And the purpose of the study was to figure out what made a difference in the life of the young people who beat the odds, went off to positive life outcomes. And what were the things that they had in common, from those ones who didn't and became the statistics we know all too well. And the research study unequivocally showed that the young folks who went off to good life outcomes, higher education, jobs, community, family, those young folks all had one meaningful adult in their life. And 95% of the time, guess who that meaningful adult was? It was a teacher. Hang out with that for a second, not 5 meaningful adults, not 2 meaningful adults, one meaningful adult? Put a young person on a path to thriving in life. And so that raises the question of, what does that meaningful adult do? And how can we be that in the life of somebody else? I ask myself that all the time. And what we know about the research is that transformative educators are not masters of content. Sure, in higher education, they need to be passionate about their discipline. They're not necessarily masters of pedagogy. Unfortunately, too many professors are not given the support in pedagogy that they deserve and need. But what we know more than ever is that meaningful, transformative adults build relationships with students. That's it. And nobody thrives, certainly not the neurodiverse, without feeling connected to, without feeling seen and cared about. And that path towards relationship building sometimes goes by the wayside when we're trying to disseminate content at people all day long, and we got to get it back. Hey, I know the power of that. I think we more often than not think of relationship building as something, those K-12 teachers do or should do. But here we are in higher education, and hey, what we're all about is content, and ideas. And that is true, but let's get that connection back, especially now in the day and age of virtual learning. I know the power of that in my own life, and I want to end on this. I told you all I went to Brown. The thing I did not tell you is that I transferred to Brown University from a very fine four-year institution in LA called Loyola Marymount University. But I'll be honest with you, I went to LMU with no interest of being a student. I went there to be an athlete, to be a soccer player. My survival strategy in school was to be good at something, and I became good at soccer. It's what researchers call an island of competency, something to hang on to in a sea of failure and frustration. And it got me to LMU. It was my only goal in life, was to play Division I soccer, and I achieved that goal. So I get onto campus, and throughout my freshman year, rightfully so, the soccer coach makes us go around to the different academic departments, listen to their presentations, and figure out what we want to major in, right? And I'll be real with y'all, I'd go to these things, I'd sit in the back of the room, not listen to a word. I was there to major in soccer because a part of me still believed that I was the stupid, crazy, lazy kid, And then one day, I'll never forget, we got to the English department. And the chair of the department was a Shakespeare scholar, Jesuit priest named Father Young. And Father Young was up there talking about literature and learning like his head was on fire. But more important than that, he told his own story. He talked about his own challenges. He talked about his alcoholic father. He talked about his own learning differences and neurodiversities. And when he did that publicly, he told my story. And that was life-changing. So I went up to him after the presentation. I say, hey, Father Young, man, you just told my story. And it inspired me. And I think I might want to be an English major like you did. But I don't know if I can do it. I said to him, I said, hey, I got dyslexia. I got ADD. School was always hard for me. And I'll never forget, that guy looked right at me and he said, son, you're using that as an excuse. He called me right out, and he was right. I had forgotten what it meant to aspire to something bigger than the labels put upon me. And he called me out, He said, I believe in you. You can do this. And he told me all about accommodations. And he told me about how I had a right to do school differently. And I needed to advocate for that right. And that guy put me on a different path. So I walked out of that man's office, never forget. And I went over that day to the Dean of Academic Enrollment, right? And I was on cloud nine. I walked into that man's office and I said, hey, I'm here to study me some English literature, let's do it. It is game time, right? And that guy, he pulled out my file. I'm sure y'all know the file, right? If you're a kid like me, you've had files your whole life, right? When I was a kid, I had something called an individualized education plan. got to be real about that thing, IEP, right? IEP, individualized education plan, NSA, KGB, got nothing on the IEP, right? They've been doing deep intel on me my whole life. The file is this thick, and it ain't good news in that file. So that guy starts flipping through his file, and he laughs at me. And he says, English literature, you can't read, you can't write, you can't spell. You shouldn't even be in college, he said to me. You know, I walked out of that man's office. I was 18, you know, and I was deflated like a balloon. Never underestimate the power of our expectations to elevate another human being, to help them see and become their best self before they even know it, or to be another voice in the chorus of low expectations in somebody's life. That's a choice we make every day with our words. So when that man said that to me, you know, I was the stupid, crazy, lazy kid again. I was chilling with the janitor in the hallway again. I was the kid who could only kick a ball again. So I went back to Father Young, you know, out of respect to him. And I said to him, hey, man, don't worry about that piece of paper I asked you to sign, not going to be an English major. And he said, why? You were so excited about it. And I told him, I said, hey, you know, that guy over there, he said I couldn't do it because of my learning differences. And Father Young was real quiet for a long time. And then he said in a way that only an old school Jesuit can. He said, well, son, I guess you're just going to have to prove that bastard wrong. And the next day, I enrolled in 4 English literature classes. And that man who told me I shouldn't be in college, let's just say that he has an autographed copy of my books on his desk right now. Prove him wrong, right? Now, I'm proud that I proved that guy wrong. I am. But do you know what I'm more proud of? I am more proud that I proved Father Young. I'm more proud that I proved my mom. I'm more proud that I proved all those people who believed in my potential. I'm more proud that I proved them right. And that's your work. You know, that's our work together. Our work together is to challenge that tyrannical idea that the normal human is good and right. Our work is to help young folks with neurodiversities understand that their differences don't make them deficient. And ultimately, our work is to believe in them, perhaps before they believe in themselves. Our work is to build a world that understands and recognizes that young folks with neurodiversities have strengths, gifts, and talents to contribute to the world, not despite their differences, but because of their differences. And ultimately, our work together is to build systems and potentially a culture where every single human being has a right to be different. Okay, that's all I got for y'all. I talked a little bit longer than I was hoping to at you, but I get riled up, as you can see. It's now the time in our presentation where I'm going to turn over to Q&A. We got about 15 minutes to do that. I do want to let you all know now, in case we need to move on, because I know you all have busy lives, and I appreciate the time that you've already spent thinking about neurodiversity with me today. I do want to put in the chat feature, hopefully you can see it by the facilitator from the Resource Center, my email address. So if you have a question or a comment that we don't get to, or if you need to move on, you can write me directly. My email address is my name. It's all one word. It's lowercase. It is Jonathan Mooney, which is JONATHANMOONEY. It's Jonathan Mooney at me.com. So if you need to move on in your day, feel free to write me, not just with a question, but perhaps more importantly, if there's an opportunity to speak to any of the students that you care about, please feel free to reach out. That is how I spend my life. That is, as the kids say, my jam. So with that said, I'm going to check out this Q&A feature. I see we got one right up front. Bear with me for a second while I push on that, read the question, reread the question probably 4 times because I'm not a good reader. And then I'll reiterate the question and dive into it, okay? Best way to start out Q&A, which was just a very nice comment saying that the participant really enjoyed the presentation and thanked me for being here today. And I thank you, whoever you may be, for that question, for that comment, and appreciate the opportunity to be here with you, of course. Okay. I think that's all we're seeing in the Q&A. I'll give maybe folks just another minute if they have anything that they want to put in there.
Hey, Jonathan, sorry, it looks like
anything.
There are, if
What's
you
up, Peter?
click to the answered column, it looks like some of them are going over into the answered column.
Peter, you broke up a little bit on me, man. I'm not sure if that's on my end or your end, but
if you click on the section answered in chat, looks like some of the comments are going in there. And we have one from Pam Best who says, awesome, loved your presentation. And then I have another from Jean who said, love this. I'm an occupational, sorry.
Oh yeah, I got you here. Okay. Beautiful, man. I'm seeing it. Check out Jennifer's comment and then I'll jump in. Thanks, Peter. Awesome. Jennifer, thank you so much for your question and comment. I want to surface the comment part of Jennifer's post first, and then address her question, and use it as an opportunity to think about some other things. So Jennifer very passionately shared her own professional journey, working to elevate the notion of neurodiversity in professional or business settings, helping us all understand our neurodiverse colleagues in whatever professional setting you may find yourself in. Guess what? There are the neurodiverse there. And too often, as I mentioned, but Jennifer put eloquently, folks with neurodiversities hide their difference, because neurodiversity is by definition an invisible disability or difference, invisible identity community. One has to self-disclose that, and many people don't, and I was one of those people for a very long time. It's tempting to try to fake or pass as normal. And I use that word passing with intentionality, with all due deference and reference to the long history of LGBTQ plus folks being forced by a culture to hide their true sense of self, and the great political strategy it was at the time and still is to this day to sort of live out and proud. And again, I have taken a lot of social change models and inspiration from the LGBTQ plus movement, and see great intersection between the work that we're talking about and that movement. So I just wanted to say amen, Jennifer, you are on the right path. I also want to share with you a resource that there is a growing movement of private sector employers who are not just accommodating neurodiversity, but see it as a business imperative. SAP, one of the largest software ventures in the world, has an autism at work program. And what makes it different is it's not just, hey, let's be inclusive of folks with autism who work here. It's let's intentionally hire folks on the autistic continuum because they have strengths that we need as a business. And I think more and more, if we can flip the deficit model, and if we can stop looking at neurodiversity through a pathology lens and see it through a diversity lens instead, we can see that different brains are a part of the diversity of any human population. And like other forms of diversity, it's valuable in and of itself. And it should be not just included, but it should be celebrated. So I appreciate, Jennifer, the work that you're doing. This video, and this was your question, will be shared. I know that our wonderful support professional who facilitated this maybe can put the information about it being shared in the chat. And there was a question around collaboration. Hey, I'm interested in collaborating with anybody and everybody who's on this mission, this shared mission to elevate neurodiversity as a form of human diversity and to work with our institutions and cultural practices to celebrate folks who have so much to contribute to the world. So I appreciate it, and feel free to write me directly on my email that I gave out before. Okay, I'm going back to the Q&A here. Here we go. Another Minnie Mouse, yes. Awesome. So Kathy just shared being another Minnie Mouse. I don't know whether you curse or not, Minnie Mouse, cursing Minnie Mouse or not, Kathy, but I hope so. Sometimes an F-bomb is just needed every now and then. Let's be real. With tradition, of course, but it's important. And what would I suggest for university students right now? That was Kathy's question. Well, first of all, this is at a systems level, and then I'll go to the day-to-day level, and I'll give you a good example of this. Too often, neurodiversity and frankly disability is not seen institutionally in higher education as a diversity issue. It's conceptualized as a legal compliance issue. Let me give you a really clear example of what I mean by that. And it pertains to my alma mater. I'm a very proud Brown alumni, Brown University alumni. Somebody in that admissions officer took a chance on me, and I hope I've done them proud. And I promote the institution everywhere I go as a place that was very inclusive and still is for folks with different brains and bodies. However, about 5 years ago, the institution embarked on a audit of its current practices around diversity, and it was a C-level, president-level initiative that was well resourced. And not only did they do an audit of diversity practices, what was working and what was not working, more importantly, they also mapped significant fiscal resources to remedying the findings of this audit to be more inclusive. There was a 100+ page report developed by the committee who led the diversity audit. And guess how many times in that hundreds of pages of report, the word disability or ability status was mentioned? One time. That's it. Because we don't think of ability status as a form of diversity. Or we are beginning to think that way, but it's been slow and cumbersome. If you go to many corporate entities and an institution of higher education's diversity statements, ability is left out, and that's wrong. So a place to start is to elevate this from the compliance conversation of are we following the ADA to a diversity conversation. And that is true across the institution. Are we seeking out diverse applicants with different brains and bodies? Are we hiring faculty that is representative of that form of diversity? And are we investing academic research dollars to centers around disability studies, etc., in the same way that we are and should do around other identity categories and diversity categories? So that's at the high level, systems level. So let me come back down to the day-to-day. We have to have intentional activities from the first time we engage students, their freshman year, that help young folks with neurodiversities develop a sense of a positive identity. In the same way that there are a number of initiatives for first year experiences around Black and Brown young folks, around first gen college attendees, right? Rightfully so. Those are powerful initiatives. We do them because we know that it improves retention and completion. We need to do the same for folks with learning and attentional and other neurodiversities to build community, to build identity. And we need to have intentional activities around that. And then another one of the practical outcomes of that is to link them to the accommodations that they deserve. The first question was a lot about, a lot of people hiding this. Well, guess what? First year students hide their neurodiversities at exponential rates. Because, for many first year students, I did this my first year at LMU. For many first year students, this is a do-over. They've been so ashamed of getting special education services in the past because we have framed those services as a problem, a way to fix a problem in them. They have no sense of pride around this. So when they can go to a new place, guess what they do? They don't tell a soul. I did that my first semester at LMU. Guess what happened? I almost failed out. And we have to have intentionality to build that community and identity, as I mentioned, but also to encourage them to self-disclose. To the Office of Disability Services, every college has one of those. They go by different names, but the same idea is true. But also to their faculty members, to their friends, to others, because it's only in being that self-advocate that somebody can really manage and navigate a system that wasn't built for them. So that's kind of where I start, at the high systems level. This is a form of diversity and should be integrated in all of our diversity conversations at a systems level. And then at the student level, community, identity, advocacy. What does it mean that us have intentionality in our support model, just like we do with first gen Black and Brown LGBTQ folks for folks with neurodiversities? And I think those are a powerful potential path forward. Okay, I talk a lot, so I don't think, let me just work through this real quick. So there was another wonderful compliment, said, thanks for keeping it real. It's kind of the only way I know how to do this. And then I was asked, have I ever worked with students in their relationship with neurodiverse faculty? This is really a powerful question. One of our researchers who is neurodiverse is working on this, and it seems to be a highly unpublished area. Yeah, hey, this is a two-way street, isn't it? Just like we know, 1 in 5 of any population, if not more, will have a neurodiversity. That's 1 of 5 of folks at Harvard. That's 1 of 5 folks at San Francisco State University, and everything in between. And we know that on the mental health side, those neurodiversity numbers are growing even greater when it comes to experiences of anxiety, depression, etc. But the same is true for neurodiverse faculty, and sometimes, maybe too often, faculty hide it too, because guess what? If you're at the pinnacle of academia, you may not want to tell folks that you have a neurodiversity in the same way that I didn't when I was a freshman. And then subsequently, there can be a lot of misunderstanding between student and faculty. There's many behaviors of the neurodiverse that are misconstrued. And often that leads to relationship challenges in personal lives, that leads to relationship challenges between faculty and student, wherever the neurodiversity lies. And at the most concerning, that leads to problems with the criminal justice system. Do y'all know that almost 85% of all folks who have been murdered by officers on duty, not only were those folks almost exclusively Black and brown men and women, they were also people with neurodiversity, because the behaviors of somebody on the spectrum are misinterpreted. The behaviors of somebody struggling with a mental health crisis are misunderstood, and the same is true. So I think that this is a ripe area for publication, for research, but perhaps more importantly, for deep culture and systems change. Okay, everybody, 11:45, that is our time. It was really an honor and a privilege to be here with you today. Or if you weren't here and you're watching this later, I appreciate you making that time and commitment. I'll reiterate again, whether it be collaboration on the research side, the speaking side, whether it just be to say, hey, what's up? You can email me. It's Jonathan Mooney, which is JONATHANMOONEY. My thank you to the Resource Center. My thank you to Macmillan and everybody there who has boldly supported my second book, The Short Bus, and now most recently my new book, which has a very subtle title, as I mentioned, called Normal Sucks. I really appreciate everything they've done, not for my book, but what they've done to advance a more inclusive culture where folks with different brains and bodies are celebrated and valued. Okay, thank you all very much. Feel free to email me, and I appreciate your time. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're out.
I think so. I'm
Perfect.
sure we're still live, but I just have to say thank you. That was terrific.
Well, thank you. And